In this lecture, we're going to continue writing our test for the About component. We've taken care of mounting the component to the document. The next step is to write an assertion. We're going to call the expect function. The test we're creating will check if the inner text is outputted. Therefore, we'll need to access the inner text of the component. We can do so by calling the wrapper.text method. The wrapper object represents the component. It has a method called text that will return the inner text of a component. We'll chain the toContain function. The toContain function will check if a string contains the string you pass into it. We'll pass in about. The assertion we're making is the following. We expect the text to contain the string about. You'll notice that we're able to form statements based on the functions we're chaining. Most testing tools are verbose. It makes it easier to understand what we're testing. This is by design. It allows other developers to easily understand what you're testing. Let's try running this test. Switch over to the browser. The test will have successfully passed. Fantastic! We're able to accomplish this thanks to the Vue Test Utilities library. In the resource section of this lecture, I provide a link to the wrapper API we used. This library helps write expressive tests that are easy to read. It might seem confusing at first, but it'll make sense the more you use it. We'll get plenty of practice using it. There's another method I want to introduce that we can use to mount the component. Switch back to the editor. We're going to update the import statement to import a function called shallowMount instead of mount. Next, we'll replace the use of the mount function with the shallowMount function in our test. The shallowMount does the same thing as the mount function. It'll take a component, mount it, and return an object with methods and properties for interacting with the instance. The main difference is it'll limit how many children components the instance may have. Here's an example to show the differences between the two functions. The mount function will allow the component to load as many children as it wants. The shallowMount function will limit the component to one level of children components. If the child component of the component we're mounting attempts to load additional components, they will not get loaded. It's a useful method for isolating the component. It'll prevent a test from returning a false positive. This issue can occur if the children component contains the content we were checking for in the component we mounted. For the rest of this course, we're going to use the shallowMount function whenever possible. It's much faster and efficient than the mount function. There is an alternative syntax for shallow mounting a component. We can use the mount function to shallow mount a component. I'll switch this back to the mount function for a moment. The shallowMount and mount functions have a second argument for configuring how the component is mounted. We can pass in an object. We can add a property to this object called shallow with a value of true. The shallow property will do the same thing as the shallowMount component. It'll prevent children components from getting rendered. The shallow property and shallowMount functions perform the same task. There isn't a difference between the two. You can use whichever you prefer. I prefer to use the shallowMount function for readability. I'll change this back to the shallowMount function. Let's try running the test. The test will still pass. Great! Thanks to the Vue Test Utils library, we're able to test components and interact with them.